The ambulance lights spun red and white across Marcus Webb's quiet suburban driveway that morning. His wife Elena lay motionless on the gurney while paramedics shouted urgent commands to each other. Marcus gripped the wheels of his wheelchair, his hands trembling from fear and helpless rage. He had served 2 tours overseas, but nothing prepared him for watching Elena turn pale. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance while neighbors peeked nervously from behind their curtains. Then came a voice sharper than any siren, cutting through the chaos like broken glass. Diane Holcomb stormed across her lawn with a clipboard clutched tightly. "This ambulance is blocking the community aesthetic guidelines," she shouted, pointing aggressively at the vehicle. Marcus stared at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend such cruelty during a medical emergency. "My wife is dying," he said, his voice cracking with desperation and exhaustion. Diane ignored him completely, her eyes fixed only on the offending emergency vehicle. She pulled a can of red spray paint from her oversized designer handbag. "No vehicles outside approved specifications," she snapped, shaking the can with chilling determination. The paramedics froze for a moment, stunned by the audacity of her bizarre obsession. Diane sprayed jagged red lines across the ambulance hood while neighbors gasped in horror. Marcus screamed for her to stop, his wheelchair rolling forward in frantic protest. A young paramedic shouted, "Ma'am, you are interfering with emergency operations." Diane laughed coldly, insisting the HOA bylaws superseded any emergency vehicle exceptions whatsoever. The neighbor across the street, Priya Patel, hands. "This is insane," Priya whispered, capturing every reckless second of Diane's destructive tantrum. Elena's eyes fluttered weakly as paramedics fought to stabilize her condition inside the vehicle. Marcus felt his chest tighten with a mixture of terror and burning fury. He had survived explosions overseas, yet this moment felt unbearably more dangerous somehow. Diane moved toward the ambulance doors, blocking the paramedics from loading his wife inside. "You cannot park here without prior HOA board approval," she insisted with chilling calm. The lead paramedic radioed for police backup, his voice tight with controlled urgency. Neighbors slowly emerged from their homes, drawn by the commotion and rising tension. Marcus wheeled closer, desperate to physically shield the ambulance from further vandalism. "Please," he begged. "My wife needs hospital care right now, not bureaucratic nonsense." Diane's eyes narrowed with disdain as she glanced down at his wheelchair dismissively. "Rules are rules," she said flatly, spraying another reckless streak across the windshield. Priya stepped forward bravely, phone still recording, voice trembling with controlled anger. "You are assaulting emergency property," she said. "The police are already on their way." Diane spun toward her, clipboard raised like a weapon of self-righteous authority. "This neighborhood has standards," she snapped. "Standards people like you clearly don't understand." The comment landed heavy, laced with an ugly undertone everyone present immediately recognized. Marcus felt his jaw clench, old memories of discrimination surfacing through years of healing. He had moved here for peace, not for another battle against unjust power. Elena moaned weakly, her oxygen mask fogging with each labored, frightened breath. "Move the ambulance," Diane demanded again, ignoring the medical crisis unfolding before her. Sirens grew louder, signaling police cars turning sharply onto the quiet residential street. Marcus closed his eyes briefly, praying help would arrive before something worse happened. The paramedics exchanged tense glances, unsure whether to restrain Diane or continue working. Diane raised the paint can once more, eyes wild with unstoppable, irrational determination. "Stop right there," a stern police voice suddenly cut through the chaotic driveway. Marcus opened his eyes, hope flickering through the fear gripping his exhausted body. The story was only beginning, and justice felt impossibly far away in that moment. Two police officers stepped out, hands resting cautiously near their service weapons. Diane barely glanced at them, still fixated on her precious community aesthetic standards. "Ma'am," one officer commanded with firm, practiced authority. Diane hesitated, clutching the can tighter while glaring defiantly at the approaching officers. Marcus watched, praying the situation wouldn't escalate further before help arrived. The paramedics finally managed to wheel Elena's gurney toward the ambulance's open doors. Diane lunged sideways, attempting to block their path one final desperate time. "You cannot remove that vehicle," she shrieked. "It violates Section 12 of our bylaws." The officer stepped between Diane and the gurney, voice rising with controlled intensity. "This is a medical emergency. Ma'am. Arrest." Diane's face flushed red, fury overtaking whatever rational thought remained inside her mind. "Do you know who I am?" she screamed. "I run this entire community." Priya kept filming, capturing the unraveling scene for everyone watching online later. Neighbors murmured among themselves, disbelief mixing with quiet satisfaction at her crumbling control. Marcus rolled closer, determined to ensure Elena received care despite this nightmare unfolding. "Please," he said, voice raw with exhaustion. Diane turned toward him again, contempt flashing across her overly powdered face. "This is exactly why we have screening processes for new residents," she muttered cruelly. The words hung heavy, exposing prejudice she had barely bothered concealing until now. Marcus felt years of quiet dignity crack slightly under the weight of injustice. He had fought for this country, yet still faced judgment from people like Diane. The officer's expression hardened, recognizing the discriminatory undertone laced through her statement. "Ma'am. And your behavior is escalating this situation dangerously." Diane ignored the warning, raising the paint can toward the ambulance once more. "I'll finish what I started," she hissed, spraying another reckless mark across metal. The officer moved swiftly, grabbing her wrist before she could spray further damage. Diane shrieked, attempting to break free from his firm grip. "Get your hands off me," she screamed. "I have rights as HOA president." The second officer stepped forward, recognizing the situation required immediate physical intervention now. Marcus watched as the confrontation reached a dangerous, irreversible tipping point. Diane shoved the officer hard, her composure completely shattering under accumulated entitled rage. "That's assault on an officer," the second officer announced, reaching for his taser. Neighbors gasped collectively, some recording disbelief. Priya whispered, shaking as she kept the camera steady. Diane lunged again toward the ambulance, Completely disregarding every warning given previously, the officer issued one final command. Voice sharp with unmistakable final authority. Stand down now, or you will be tossed. This is your last warning. Diane screamed something incoherent, swinging the paint can wildly toward the officer's face. The taser fired with a sharp crackling sound that silenced the entire street. Diane convulsed and crumpled instantly onto her perfectly manicured, rule-obsessed front lawn. Marcus exhaled sharply, relief and disbelief crashing over him in overwhelming waves. The paramedics seized the opportunity, swiftly loading Elena into the ambulance at last. We've got her stabilized, the lead paramedic shouted, slamming the damaged doors shut. Marcus reached out, gripping the ambulance briefly before they sped toward the hospital. Diane lay groaning on the grass, finally restrained by officers cuffing her wrists. Neighbors began clapping quietly, years of resentment finally finding bitter, satisfying release. Marcus watched the ambulance disappear around the corner, praying Elena would survive this. The officers hauled Diane to her feet, reading her rights amid the gathering crowd. You'll regret this, Diane spat, though her threats now carried absolutely no weight. Marcus turned his wheelchair slowly, watching her drag toward the waiting police cruiser. For the first time that morning, he allowed himself one trembling breath of hope. Diane was shoved into the back seat, her designer blazer smeared with red paint. Neighbors gathered closer, whispering about years of unfair fines and biased HOA decisions. Priya approached Marcus gently, offering her phone footage as evidence for whatever followed. This needs to be seen, she said. What she did was absolutely unforgivable today. Marcus nodded weakly, his mind still racing toward the hospital and Elena's condition. A kind neighbor offered to drive him immediately, refusing to let him wait alone. At the hospital, suffered a severe cardiac episode that morning. Thanks to the paramedics' quick action, she was stabilized despite Diane's reckless interference. Marcus sat beside her bed, gripping her hand as relief finally overwhelmed him completely. You're safe now, he whispered, tears finally falling after holding them back desperately. Meanwhile, online, capturing outrage across local and national platforms. News outlets picked up the story, highlighting Diane's shocking abuse of HOA authority. Investigators uncovered a disturbing pattern of discriminatory fines targeting minority and disabled residents, veterans, and families with disabilities had quietly suffered under her tyrannical leadership. Many had been too intimidated or exhausted to challenge her relentless harassment campaigns. Marcus's case became the breaking point that finally exposed years of hidden injustice. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, swiftly removing Diane from her position permanently. Prosecutors charged her with vandalism, assault on an officer, and reckless endangerment charges. Diane's lawyer argued diminished responsibility, but evidence overwhelmingly contradicted her desperate legal defense. At trial, describing the terror of watching Elena's life endangered, she chose paint and power over my wife's life, he told the silent courtroom. The judge's expression hardened, clearly moved by Marcus's composed yet devastating testimony. Diane was found guilty on all charges, her courtroom composure finally crumbling completely. She received a substantial fine, probation, from the community. Stripped of her HOA position. She was also banned from holding leadership roles again. Her once pristine reputation collapsed entirely under the weight of public scrutiny and shame. Former neighbors who once feared her now spoke openly about her years of cruelty. The community elected a new HOA board prioritizing fairness, kindness. Marcus was invited to help draft updated bylaws protecting residents from future abuses. He accepted. He endured what he and Elena suffered. Elena recovered steadily, her strength returning as weeks passed into healing months. Sitting together on their porch, they watched the neighborhood feel different now. Lighter somehow. Children played freely on the street where fear had once silently dominated everything. Priya visited often, becoming a cherished friend after standing brave during their darkest moment. "You changed this place," she told Marcus. Watching sunset colors paint the quiet street, Marcus smiled. Knowing the fight had never truly been about winning against Diane alone. It had been about protecting dignity, fairness. Diane lived quietly elsewhere, stripped of power and haunted by public infamy. Her name became a cautionary tale whispered among HOA boards across the entire country. Marcus often reflected that justice rarely arrived instantly, but it eventually found its way. Courage. And one brave neighbor's recording had finally tipped the scales toward truth. The driveway where chaos once erupted now held nothing but quiet, peaceful normalcy. Every evening, grateful for Elena's laughter echoing through their safe home. Their story became proof that abusive power, however entrenched, could ultimately be defeated. Standing up against injustice, even when terrifying, could spark change far beyond one driveway. And in that quiet, Marcus finally felt the war within him end.